obviously Carlos Hyde being dealt to the Jacksonville Jaguars for a fifth-round draft pick. This is a big deal, and it's a pretty complicated situation here. Lots of wrinkles to talk through here with the Carlos Hyde and the entire running back situation, because this doesn't just affect Carlos Hyde. It doesn't just affect the Cleveland Browns. You're talking about a deal where Carlos Hyde now going to Jacksonville. What does this mean about Leonard Fournette? What can we expect this week with Carlos Hyde and TJ Yeldon? Is Carlos Hyde going to get any run at all this week in Jacksonville? So yeah, let's start off first. I mean, the obvious situation here with Carlos Hyde not being in Cleveland anymore is Nick Chubb, right? Nick Chubb now becomes the de facto number one running back for Cleveland. And, you know, Nick Chubb might be owned in your leagues. I'm not looking at ownership percentages right now, but what we know from Nick Chubb, obviously, is in college at Georgia, he was an absolute stud when healthy. I think this is a really, really good fit for that offense in general, simply because Duke Johnson needs to be more involved in what Cleveland's doing so far this year. And you have a situation where Nick Chubb is a really, really good complement to what Duke Johnson brings to the table. So I think as far as the planning that we're looking for, or that Cleveland was looking for going into this season, I think this plays out exactly the way that they wanted it to. Let's run Carlos Hyde as much as we possibly can until that perfect trade situation happens, and then transition into the Nick Chubb era, right? So that's exactly what's happened here. We're 7 weeks into the season, and now Nick Chubb becomes the number one. And let's face it, looking at the Cleveland Browns schedule, this sets up really, really well for the running options there in that Cleveland backfield. This week they play at Tampa Bay. This is a defense that's absolutely putrid all season long. It's like the defensive version of the Mike McCoy offense in Arizona. And, I mean, that's something else we could talk about, because Mike McCoy now gone as the offensive coordinator in Arizona. Obviously, that means a lot for David Johnson. But this is a Buccaneers defense that's been gashed every single game they've played this year. Next week, the Browns travel to Pittsburgh, so it's a really, really good matchup in Pittsburgh. Play at home against the Chiefs, home against the Falcons, and then they go to Cincinnati. So this is really a cushy spot in the schedule for the Cleveland Browns. And Nick Chubb needs to be owned in every single league, obviously. I expect from week one for Nick Chubb, I expect him to be getting 15 carries or so a game. I mean, we're talking about not workhorse, because Duke Johnson obviously is going to be heavily involved in that offense. But as far as getting run opportunities, carries out of the backfield, Nick Chubb is obviously going to be getting a ton of it. So you could expect those 15 carries from him every single week. So, yeah, I mean, as far as Duke Johnson goes, Duke Johnson's been disappointing as well. There's no doubt about it. And I'm reading right here, a lot of people are picking up Nick Chubb, which is really, really good. What to expect from him on a weekly basis? Like I said, 15 carries for him. I expect him to turn those 15 carries into 70, 80 yards. You're talking about a ceiling for him that's RB2. Not ceiling. Ceiling is up high. Floor is down low. Floor for Nick Chubb is low-end RB2. Ceiling for Nick Chubb is a little bit better than what we saw from Carlos Hyde. And that's not because I think Nick Chubb is going to be getting plenty of receptions out of the backfield. That doesn't fit his mold at all. Nick Chubb in college at Georgia hardly received any receiving looks out of the backfield. So 18 receptions in 2014 for him. He was injured off and on throughout the rest of his career there at Georgia. He's your prototypical workhorse back, and that's how Cleveland is going to be using him. As far as Duke Johnson goes, I mean, it's a tough year for him because he's not really getting much work out of the backfield as a receiver. That's changed over the last couple of weeks. So I think Duke Johnson automatically gets himself bumped up to the range where we expected from him coming into the season. So I think Duke Johnson now is flex-worthy in that Cleveland offense. I think there are weeks where he's going to be getting 10, 12 targets in a game, and he could explode for some big numbers like we saw last year. I think that starts as early as this week, by the way, because that cushy schedule for Nick Chubb, that also applies for Duke Johnson and this entire Cleveland Browns offense. I think overall this is a really, really good situation for the Browns. It perfectly played out. Even though they only got a fifth-round draft pick for Carlos Hyde, it's not like they were expecting much more in return. So, that's the Browns situation there. Pick up Nick Chubb immediately. You want to plug and play him in your lineups for the foreseeable future because his matchups are great. Same thing goes for Duke Johnson. I think that we see an increase in productivity from Baker Mayfield. I think Jarvis Landry improves as well because they just have, honestly, they have more flexibility. They can be more creative now with Nick Chubb in that backfield. We haven't seen much from him so far this year because he hasn't had the opportunities, but when he's in the game, he's obviously very explosive. As for Jacksonville, that's where this entire situation gets pretty muddy, right? Because bad timing if you're a Carlos Hyde owner. I'm sorry. But him being traded on a Friday, games on a Sunday against the Texans have done a really, really good job so far this year of stopping the run. They're number 2 overall in DVOA against the run. So that's a really bad combination. Bad matchup for Carlos Hyde this week in Jacksonville. And then number 2 is obviously, how much run is he even going to get? I would honestly be a little surprised if Carlos Hyde played at all this weekend. I don't think that Jacksonville really has that in their plans going in. So if you're a TJ Yeldon owner, and I know a lot of you are probably wondering, what do I do with TJ Yeldon? I mean, he's been really, really good as a receiving option out of the backfield. He's doing a good job running the ball as well. He's not the problem with this offense. The offense is struggling because of Blake Bortles. I think you plug and play TJ Yeldon again. I mean, he's probably your RB2 in your lineups this week. Maybe your RB1 because we do have a bunch of good teams on a bye. So keep him in your lineup. Don't make a change with TJ Yeldon in your lineup just because Carlos Hyde was traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's pretty complicated, right? When an NFL player changes teams, you can't plug and play him in that offense. So I expect Carlos Hyde not to get much action this week. Next week's a different story. They have a home game against the Eagles. And speaking of the Eagles, I guess it's sort of like, I view the Carlos Hyde situation like Jay Ajayi last year when he was traded from the Dolphins to the Eagles. A lot of people out there in the industry were assuming that he was automatically going to get a lot of run there in Philadelphia. I was not high on that deal at all as a Jay Ajayi owner. In fact, I wanted to dump him off of several of my rosters because I just didn't think he was going to get enough run to be effective. The opportunities weren't going to be there for him. Same thing applies for me with Carlos Hyde. So next week, what's he going to get? 10 carries maybe? TJ Yeldon still going to get the lion's share of the work there. Then they go on a bye, and they come back from the bye and play at Indianapolis, which would be a really, really good spot for Carlos Hyde if you're a Carlos Hyde owner. Here's where it gets a little interesting, though, because coming off the bye week, if you assume Carlos Hyde is going to start taking some carries, what happens if Leonard Fournette is healthy? Hell, what does this trade even mean for the prospects of Leonard Fournette rest of season? Like, if Jacksonville honestly thought that Leonard Fournette was going to come back healthy after the bye, would they have made this deal for Carlos Hyde? It's a legitimate question. I tend to think, Jacksonville thinks they're going to win the AFC South. It's not that they think that Leonard Fournette's going to come back healthy after the bye. I think Jacksonville made this deal as insurance just in case Leonard Fournette is healthy. I think they expect him to come back healthy, but they don't think that it's a smart play to make a playoff run with TJ Yeldon is essentially their only solid running back. So I do think this is a depth trade for Jacksonville. And really, what are they losing? It's a 5th-round draft pick, which is a hit-or-miss proposition anyway. So it's a great trade for Jacksonville. And at worst, you end up with Carlos Hyde for half a season, and you can really make quite a tandem with Carlos Hyde and TJ Yeldon. I think TJ Yeldon's played his way into consistent playing time, whether Carlos Hyde or Leonard Fournette is going to be in that lineup, especially with Carlos Hyde. So he's still going to be the pass-catching back there. TJ Yeldon this week, he's a play. I don't love him this week because it's a really good matchup for the Texans defense against a really struggling Jacksonville Jaguars offense. This is a division game, and they're usually pretty competitive. Next week, again, Eagles at home. That's not a great matchup for the Jags either. I would really be pinpointing that Colts game at Indianapolis. What do I do if I'm a Carlos Hyde owner, right? It's a really good question. because I think you're stuck with Carlos Hyde. I'm sorry. I don't have Carlos Hyde in many leagues. I don't have much exposure to him because I thought it's only a matter of time before Nick Chubb was going to be inserted in that offense. It's kind of playing out similar to the way I thought it was going to be coming into the season. Let's face it. I mean, Carlos Hyde's value just took a nosedive. There's no way around that. It's bad news. It really is bad news because if Leonard Fournette comes back healthy, Carlos Hyde's obviously not going to be the starter there in Jacksonville. Carlos Hyde's not going to be the pass-catching back in Jacksonville. He automatically becomes dead weight on your roster. You're not going to be playing him at all. If you can make a trade sending away Carlos Hyde right now before any other owners in your league understand that he's even been dealt to Jacksonville, now's the time to do it. You need to be offering up Carlos Hyde to as many different teams in your league as possible. Hell, even trade him to the Leonard Fournette owner. You could make a really good argument to that Leonard Fournette owner that they need a handcuff for Leonard Fournette, and there's not a better handcuff in the league than Carlos Hyde. I have to admit that. I mean, James Conner would have been that, but obviously Lev Bell kind of thrust him into the spotlight there. But yeah, that's what I would do with Carlos Hyde. Offer him to as many different people as you possibly can in your leagues. I don't want him on my roster. The only reason why I would want him on my roster is if I was a Leonard Fournette owner. And that's what I do. All right, guys. Any other questions? David Johnson, I do expect an uptick in his productivity now that Mike McCoy is no longer the offensive coordinator in Arizona. So he's somebody I'd be looking to buy low on right now if I were you. I do expect his productivity to increase significantly now with a new offensive coordinator. Jason McCollum, what about TJ Yeldon? Like I said, he is obviously in play this week. I don't think that Carlos Hyde's going to step right into 15 carries there in Jacksonville. I think the plan is going to be for TJ Yeldon to continue being the primary ball carrier, primary receiving threat out of the backfield this week, if not next week as well. We're coming up on a bye for Jacksonville in 2 weeks. And that's really the point in which you would think that the Jacksonville Jaguars would really install him into the offense. So yeah, TJ Yeldon needs to be played this week. It's a tough matchup against the Texans, but we're really at a part in the fantasy schedule where we're having plenty of buys and you don't really have many options. So if TJ Yeldon was in your lineup, you need to continue to play him. Hyde is going to a better situation. I would dispute that for sure. Carlos Hyde's going into a situation where he's at best a 1A, 1B with TJ Yeldon, and he's changing teams in the middle of a season. It's not that easy to just pick up a completely new offense. The argument is going to be, well, running backs have it easy, right? You get the ball and you run it either left, right, or up the middle. It's really not that simple. And we've seen this before. No, I'm not from Philadelphia. I just really love this Phillies hat. We've seen this situation before, right? Jay Ajayi last year is a perfect example of this. Illustration 1A. You can't just change teams and expect to continue getting 15 carries a game. It's not going to work that way for Carlos Hyde. So, yeah, maybe he's in a better situation, as in the team is more successful. But Carlos Hyde was getting a lot of run in Cleveland, and that offense isn't a bad offense. Hyde is not startable this week at all. Do not start Carlos Hyde. If you're just in the mood to throw some darts, sure. But don't expect much from Carlos Hyde at all. I do use a clipper guard on my facial hair. That's right. Go with a solid half. Half. And then if you look right here, even less. Even less. So I fade my facial hair, bro. I do. All right, guys. I think that's just about it. Josh Rosen not expected to miss any time with his foot. DeAndre Hopkins has been removed from the injury report, so he's good to go this weekend. Absolutely 420. Marshawn Lynch, by the way, with a groin injury, expected to miss at least a month. So now Doug Martin is in play there. Jalen Richard is in play there. I think that what's going to happen is it's going to be a two-headed monster out of that backfield, with Jalen Richard being a good threat to catch plenty of balls. They're going to get in a situation in Oakland, by the way, where they're going to need to throw the ball a ton. Yeah, Fournette injured for the next 2 weeks at least. I think that's what I think this trade means for you Leonard Fournette owners, is that the Jacksonville Jaguars obviously don't expect him back until after the bye, and Carlos Hyde is an insurance policy. What team will bring in Mike McCoy next? I'd be looking for some high school teams out there who are looking for a consultant for their offensive coordinator. So that's where I'd expect Mike McCoy to be next. T.Y. Hilton removed from the injury report. Good news. So it looks like he is good to go this weekend as well. The problem is going to be it's a matchup against the Buffalo Bills, and I would honestly expect Tre'Davious White to shadow T.Y. Hilton. He's a shadow corner, which would open up a lot for Ryan Grant, for Chester Rogers. I actually have a team in my home league where I have T.Y. Hilton and Chester Rogers. I'm playing Chester Rogers over T.Y. Hilton. Any other questions? Any other Mike McCoy related questions? Kerryon Johnson is a good number 2. Absolutely. I had Kerryon Johnson as my number 19 running back ranked overall coming into the season. He's kind of getting Aaron Jones there in Detroit. He's the obvious most talented running back for the Lions, and they just refuse to give him the ball like they should. If Detroit wants to be competitive, if they want to score more points, they can't just continue to throw the ball 75 times a game. They're going to have a run game. And Kerryon Johnson is special with the ball in his hands. He's a gasher. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's proved that. Pass protection isn't awesome, but it's not bad either. So yeah, Kerryon Johnson's a good number 2, and I think he's going to work his way into something more. I think he could be somebody who's a really sneaky trade target for you, somebody who could be a top 15 back rest of season. You should play Taylor Gabriel over T.Y. Hilton. Taylor Gabriel is a beast, and Allen Robinson isn't exactly healthy. He did not practice yesterday. He was downgraded from limited to a DNP, so haven't checked on his practice report today to see if he's practicing. If he gets in a full practice, yeah, Allen Robinson's looking good, but Taylor Gabriel has standalone value as a wide receiver anyway. He's looked awesome the last couple of weeks. He's getting the targets, which that's the knock on Taylor Gabriel, right, is he's really effective with the ball's hands, but he just doesn't get it that often. So, yeah, continue running Taylor Gabriel in your wide receiver slot. All right, that just about does it. Have any questions, hit us up on fantasyinsiders.com, on Twitter at Fantasy Insiders. I'm Jeff Johnson with the Fantasy Insiders. You can catch me on Twitter at Jeff Johnson FI. Have a good Friday, and good luck this week, guys.